All right, let me pin myself so you can feel free to be visible in your camera. My video is the one that's pinned. That's what we'll show on the recording. And I'm really happy to be here with you all today. This is such a big topic, and planning for a single class always feels like I'm trying to cram so much in this 90-minute space. But just so you all know, it is leading to a longer class. There will be a 5-week program starting in May. And so if you want to go deeper than what we're able to touch on here, then there's that opportunity. But I will do my best to give a complete experience today. We're set for 90 minutes. If you have to go at any point during that time, you're going to get a recording so you won't miss anything. And I am going to leave a good amount of time for Q&A, just getting your personal questions answered. So I hope that that's helpful, and I hope you'll stick around for that part. Or you can always put something in the chat if you do have to leave, and then I can answer it, and you can come back to the recording and hear your question answered. So I'm Stacy. If you don't know me, well, I'm Stacy Ramsauer. I am a mother of 2 children. They're 3 and 4. I live in Tucson, and my professional experience includes being a yoga teacher, doula, somatic sex educator, postpartum doula, Ayurvedic practitioner, somatic experiencing practitioner and training. Got lots of things. I've done lots of things, but my orientation to holistic healing really was a very personal journey for me. My experience of being an adoptee propelled me into birth work, really wanting to understand and hold sacred that experience of a mother being born, a baby being born. And that has completely transformed my life. My first pregnancy ended in a loss at almost 12 weeks, and that further propelled me into this very specific line of thinking and orientation. As far as I'm concerned, birth is the most sacred experience a human being can have, both being born and birthing. I think it's an incredible privilege that women have. And it is an underworld journey, and that is by design. And that's something that I don't think it's talked about or acknowledged enough. And sexual expression, sexuality, and sex itself are critical components of our development as human beings, our experience of wholeness. And so learning to be a sexual mother, which I think is a learned skill, it is an adaptation that we make, is a critical component of finding our wholeness and our vitality in motherhood. And sexual mother is a term that I think was coined by, I certainly heard it first from Kimberly Ann Johnson. She's a friend of mine. She's been a mentor to me. I study with her, and her work is all over this work. So if you're familiar with her, you'll probably have some head nodding going on. And if you're not familiar with her, please get her book, The Call of the Wild, and enjoy. It's a transformational book. But I'd love to just know a bit more. There's a couple of you who've added to the chat. If there's anything you want to add or be seen in adding to the chat about what brought you here. Emily, you were brave enough to come off mute and share with us. This is information you need, I heard you say. If anyone else wants to add anything with your voice or in the chat, please do. And it could be what brought you here initially or anything that resonates with you so far. And if you don't know anyone else in this group, I'm just here to assure you you're in very good company. I see these gorgeous humans and I'm like, oh, some of my very favorites are here.
Hi y'all, I'm Morgan. I'm just finishing up pumping, so that's why my camera's off right now.
That's okay.
And spilled milk all over myself, so I'll probably off for a minute until I resolve that. I gave birth to my little one 6 months ago. And just really want to learn this information and be connected to that. Additionally, I myself am a a certified somatic experiencing practitioner as well, around like reprocessing of trauma. And I would just love to also learn about, it and its connection to like sexuality and motherhood as well. So it really, kind of the duality of personal and professional here brought me.
Awesome. Morgan, welcome.
My
Hi.
name,
Oh,
oh, go
sorry.
ahead.
Go ahead,
Hi,
Molly.
this is Molly. Um, I I don't have my phone on because I'm still driving to get home. Um, but I met Stacy at a retreat last year in Ghost Ranch, and I I have my kids are sort of older now, so I have 7-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 13-year-old. Um, so I feel like I'm in like a totally different stage of mother sexuality in that
Mhm.
I'm finally like have my body back in terms of like I feel like I own it more. In that I felt completely I didn't feel that way when I had infants and toddlers at all. And I felt like I breastfed all of my kids for 2 years, so about 6 years of that was like feeding them from my body and literally like sharing it with them. And now I'm at a point where I feel like I'm in like my second coming of age in terms of sexuality, and that like I'm really feeling it a lot more. I think about sex a lot more. I think about, my body feeling, actually being in it a lot more. And,
Mhm.
and I also have a way higher libido than I've ever had. So that's kind of a different stage for me. And that, and it's a really enjoyable time to not be sharing it so much with my kids. So that's the stage I'm in right now, which has its own challenges to navigate too. But it's interesting to see the contrast with where my husband is at. He is not in that stage at all. So that's a different kind of negotiation. And also, he's definitely like humored me about it and like is trying to show up for this. But yeah, that's a different, like he's in a completely different stage where he's has less interest in sex than
Yeah.
probably he ever has, which is an interesting dynamic.
Thanks so much, Molly. I know you're not alone in this group, in terms of that experience you beautifully described. And I also two things I want to sort of like take from your share. It was so generous. You own your body now. Fuck yeah. Celebrating that for you, with you, and this second coming of age of your sexuality and sexual expression. I think there's just something so profound and important about our ability to hold on to and to understand the fact that we are in this constant evolutionary process, even though sometimes feel very, very slow, or it does feel a bit stagnant. It can feel a bit stagnant, that we are actually always in flux and that we can count on things shifting in either direction. And there's sort of this like, my hot take for this topic overall is the secret to great sex is your capacity to be disappointed. And I'll talk more about what I mean by that as we learn about the nervous system today. But if you can be with, on a nervous system level, disappointment, that means that on some level, there's room for something else. Right. And this is where our patterns really show up. It's like, well, before I get too far ahead of myself, I'll just leave it at that. Leave it at that with my hot take and a little bit of context. I'm going to check in with the chat. Megan shared, I'm so happy to be here. I'm not going to speak as my daughter's asleep on me. Yes, understood, Megan, but I'm glad you're here. So glad you signed on anyway. This topic is very important to me as I reconnect to who I am now as mother and wife, who I am now. Brilliant. That's it. Who are you now? We have to sort of follow the thread sometimes of how we got here, the things that have fallen away, the things that are newly emergent, and be with the vulnerability and the tenderness of all of that. So thank you so much for sharing that. Would anyone else like to share with their voice before we get into some content and some
I can
learning?
share. My name is Jennifer. I'm an Ayurvedic postpartum specialist and a bereavement doula. I'm transitioning specifically into the bereavement space these last few months. I feel like grief in general over the last decade has really held me back from my sexuality.
Mhm.
And I'm just continuing to explore that. I live in a disability adjacent body. So sometimes I'm fully functioning and sometimes I'm not. I'm learning to love myself where I'm at and learning how to express what that looks like to my partner.
Mhm.
And also, I feel like there's this guilt and shame that comes up sometimes of, you know, but I'm not able right now and I don't feel like connecting. And what do I do with that? I grieve it, but how do I stay in that partnership while I'm grieving? And I think I've spent a really long time compartmentalizing my life. And now I really want to learn how to integrate all of that. And so I'm really excited to be here today. My kids are almost 14 and 11. So I've been doing the motherhood deal for a long time.
Mhm.
And I feel like my sexuality was better when they were younger. Like it felt more exploratory and exciting because like you had to hide or whatever it was. And now it's like, oh, I have the room for this, but I'm not sure that I want to. So glad to be here today.
Thank you, Jen. I don't think there's anything better than just the honest and authentic shared experience of other mothers. Hi, Sherry baby. Oh, yeah. Jen named a really critical piece of my work, which is grief. Grief is a critical component of becoming a mother. It's a non-negotiable piece of becoming a mother. And until we have grieved or learn how to, because it's ongoing, then it's very difficult to experience the full delight of what is available now, because there's a sense of continuing to grip or hold on to what was. And grieving is about shedding and acknowledging what truly moves us, fills us, delights us, gives us joy, and brings us to our knees with gratitude. And so grief is a critical piece of this becoming the mother lover. Hi, Reese. Oh my gosh, there's such sweet babes here today. Good morning, Nicole. I'm so happy you're here. Hey, so we're going to take a few moments to practice a really critical skill called orienting. Morgan, you know this well. Orienting is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to use your eyes to look around your space, your present space, and see what you see. Just let your eyes go where they want to go. And if you're sort of like flooded with thoughts about what am I doing? What is this supposed to be doing? I encourage you to find something specific, like a corner, an edge, trace the outline of a window, and just let your eyes go all the way around. I like to go where the ceiling meets the wall and slowly move my eyes all the way around. So you're turning your neck, you're moving your body a little bit, maybe getting a feeling of stretch in your eyes. Just notice if at any point there's a feeling of shift in your body, like a softening or deep breath. Nothing is supposed to happen here. You're just noticing what does happen. And if there's anything that particularly catches your eye, like a beautiful color or an object that you love or a shaft of light, for example, your child, You just stay with that for a moment. Let your eyes settle on that. And then notice how you're affected by it. Is an emotion evoked? Are there sensations present? You could even close your eyes to get more closely connected to that experience. Wherever you are in this practice and this experience, I invite you to describe it with a word or a phrase for yourself, what it's like now to be in your skin. And then if there's any sort of impulse to move your body gently, do that slowly. I really encourage you to go slowly to get as much information as possible. And you're invited to come to the chat and you can share what that was like for you. If that was difficult, if it was effective, if it was confusing, felt great. Just share whatever your experience was, and I'll give a little bit of context for what this practice is about, because we're going to use it a lot today. And we're going to use it a lot in my course if you take it. Orienting is one of the most foundational nervous system practices based on the technique of somatic experiencing, which I'm training in. And this practice is twofold. It's about getting out of the internal momentum, bringing our attention out. What is happening here in front of my face? Because often the stress is coming from inside, what we're projecting on a moment, what we're experiencing from the past, what we're anticipating. And so getting our attention out of the momentum internally can help us see, oh, actually nothing is wrong. Or here's one concrete thing that I can adjust to feel better, like close that door. Right? It's a tangible action to change our state. On a physiologic level, it also is directly connected to how our nervous system is behaving in a moment. So if we have the space and the safety to slow down enough to look around and just take in what's going on visually, that implies safety. That's interpreted, perceived by the nervous system as, oh, we're safe. Right? If there were a real threat, I'd have to keep myself fully fixated on it. And if you think about how much of the day most of us are spent fully fixated on a single point, i.e. our phone, it's easy to see how much of our stress is actually self-imposed or not real. And this simple act of orienting is a way of putting back into the nervous system the experience of safety. It's also a way to start to titrate or add in slowly a sense of safety in slowing down and taking a pause, which is critical when we're navigating any kind of change or difficult conversation or disappointment or grief, right? So I'm going to check out the chat, see what you all added here. Jen, I'm laughing at how much easier it is after these last few months. My last session with Stacy, I couldn't sit still. Growth, that's growth. You've certainly been through it, Jen. I'm so glad you're here, by the way. Sherry says, it felt like moving down, down, down. It's the way you wrote that made me really want to slow down. Feel it in my belly. Like settling in for the first time today in my body in this space. That's awesome. Michelle says more awareness and pleasure in my food. Incredible. And Michelle, you're eating with tiny humans. So that says a lot about the effectiveness of this practice. Jen, I'm breathing more deeply now. Morgan, I felt a deep sense of settling and quietness. And Morgan, only because you shared this, you're an SE practitioner. You presumably do this practice all of the time. So I just want to highlight that because it never gets old. This practice is eternally effective. It's pretty cool. It's so simple. An emotional release, tearing up. Yeah. So thank you for that, Emily. The tearing up, two things there. When we slow down, it's like, oh, right, what has been sort of like kept at bay will emerge, which often makes these slowing down practices feel unsafe, right? Because it's like, oh God, opening the floodgates. There's that anticipation that it will be too much. So that's why we just do small doses to start. But also the tearing up, any sort of lubrication of your body, and this is so critical to our conversation today, lubrication of your body, your tear ducts, you might find your nose running or you're salivating. Clearly, if we're talking about sex, lubrication is important. That's an indication that you're in the parasympathetic state. You're in a more relaxed state. So if you do struggle, for example, with lubrication, it's good information to have to know how your body's response to things, what information you're getting from that. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. I loved Reese's little addition to the chat. I see that's not there anymore, but Reese was chatting in the chat. So, okay. So feel free to share with your voice or in the chat simply. I'm not asking you for every detail. Some of you have already added to this conversation. But how has sex changed for you since having babies? And we all run the gamut. We've got some very, very, very tiny babies. We've got babies on the way. And we've got teenagers. So you could name, I want more of it. I don't want it. Communication is hard. You can name any aspect. I'm not asking you to go beyond a level of comfort in sharing here, but your sharing would be really add so much to the symphony of voices here.
I can share a little bit.
Please.
I would say initially postpartum, unsurprisingly, perhaps, based on what I hear and experience, like sex was definitely not a priority, but I think in the sort of shedding of layers of motherhood and the like rebuilding and exploring and letting things go and like shifting identity, I've found the ability to open up and like really find my sexuality for the first time. And it's been a really exciting place to explore myself and my husband. And it's been interesting, like with friends, for that to not be the common experience. Also has its own like not difficult but like interesting pieces, because so often I think the postpartum or new mom story, or even just like story of so many women, is like, you know, if you're in a relationship, you're not really having sex. And so yeah, it's been interesting to sort of connect and explore that without what I usually look for when I explore things, which is like talking to friends and sharing similar experiences.
Yeah.
That's as much as my brain can make sense of with my child here also.
Yeah, the shared experience and the difficulty when we don't share it, or when you don't see yourself mirrored or reflected back, that can be really difficult. And you also touch on something indirectly, which is there's no right way to have this experience. And part of the critical element of becoming mother, embodying mother, is that way more so than the previous developmental phase, this is individuation. You have got to find your own way. It's way more personal. It's much more about self-trust than, you know, maidenhood. You're just like throwing the pasta at the wall and being like, well, that didn't work. You're following along, right? That's how we develop socially. There is a necessary part of following along with the crowd and like feeling what that is to be part of a group. And then there's this necessary, very intense individuation, which is like the isolation of motherhood. No matter how many people are around you, it's very lonely. And that's a part of the process that we have to go through in order to then re-enter community with any sort of authority. And that doesn't mean power over or, control. It just means power. To have something to share, it has to be yours. And in the maiden time, we're just like, it's great, it's fun, but also like that's not, things change. So I'm going to share I'm going to add in this share from the poet David White, because a lot of you know me. If you know my work, my other program is called The Dark Mother, and it's about consciously engaging these shadow aspects of motherhood, like grief, like rage, like our sexuality, and understanding that this is where we transform in the shadow experience and the consequence of not having the capacity to go there. So these are words from the poet David White, and his essay is called Shadow. Even the most beneficial presence casts a shadow. Mythologically, having no shadow means being of another world, not being fully human. To live with our shadow is to understand how human beings live at a frontier between light and dark, and to approach the central difficulty, that there is no possibility of a lighted perfection in this life. That the attempt to create it is often the attempt to be held unaccountable, to be the exception, to be the one who does not have to be present or participate, and therefore does not have to hurt or get hurt. To cast no shadow on others is to vacate the physical consequences of our appearance in the world. Shadow is a beautiful inverse confirmation of our incarnation. I'll just let you sort of be with those words. Notice what landed for you, what impacted you. I'm particularly struck by there is no possibility of a lighted perfection in this life. And our capacity to be with disappointment, to grieve, being sort of the foundation for our joy and our expansion, our capacity to open and receive, which is sex. It is an opening, it is a receiving, it is a trust. It is also the capacity to direct and take charge. And most of us really fall in one side of that spectrum or the other, like control or do it for me. And holding the tension of both is quite challenging when there's so much life force energy going to mothering. It's important to acknowledge that this is like, it's obvious, I think, why this is a process. Yeah, feel free to add anything to the chat or unmute yourself. I'm just going back to the chat because there's some lovely things there.
I just wanted to share for a minute before I put my kids down, or I'm like wanting to get every minute out of this, but I did just the free first class offering with you, Stacy, about the Dark Mother, and that piece about the like if you're keeping those feelings inside, that's like siphoning from your life force that's already limited, or just how important that is. But I feel like for me, I want sex sometimes to feel safe with my husband or in myself or my world. And I think my husband needs safety before he has sex more, or like what that safety means to us is different, or is achieved as different. And when I'm not getting it the way that makes sense to me, I can feel like I just do like the shutdown. It's just like, no. And it's just such a total rigidity. And I have that capacity to be disappointed was so like, it feels like maturation. And I feel like it's just such a fine edge of growth, like, because I do see that as when I have the flexibility
to let it be whatever is happening and receive instead of saying no and limiting, you know, any kind of possibility for sex or intimacy or whatever it is. So I think that's just a huge thing for me, is not shutting down and staying open to that. Because often I want it more than my husband, and I can have a layer of shame about that. I don't hear that in a lot of conversations. But motherhood has put that pressure on of like, life force is so limited and this is so essential. And so this is worth fighting for myself, and just my yes and my no has become so much more, I'm having a relationship with it more. My whole relationship was with other people, which isn't possible then, really, if I'm not with myself. So I feel like those are very fragmented thoughts, but thank you for
You
this.
literally just outlined the 5-week course. So if you're interested, Michelle just summed it up. What will be interesting? Beautiful. I'm going to go back to the recording and just do a transcript and put it on my website. That was great. Oh, you said so many beautiful things. And I want to acknowledge, because there is this sense of like, am I alone? Am I crazy? What is going? I actually hear more often than not, and I include myself in this, I want sex more than my husband. I'm hearing that way more often than the opposite. And I think it's very interesting as we get deeper into this conversation and inquire in, like, I don't know about y'all, it's pretty obvious to me more women are doing deep healing, self-inquiry, nervous system work. And there's an element of this, you know, one of the challenges in sex after having children is that our energy fields and our bodies are expanded so much. And to open more feels like there's no capacity for that. I think there's something about, and so there's often this sense of like, we have a lot of expectations, and sex becomes this like very specific, very physical thing that we want, like, I want it to be like this. And for a lot of men, this is my imagining, this is my assumption, particularly in our culture, and this is by no means always true, but if there is a male partner, they're the ones who are working and often doing most of the breadwinning. Not always, but in the cases where they are, that sense of like, all the energy has to be focused in this one very specific, very direct way. Everything hinges on this. It all has to get done. You're responsible for everyone's safety. To expand into sexual pleasure is terrifying. It's like a threat to their sense of what is holding everything together. So I have a lot of compassion for these dynamics, and like, just finished grad school, so I'm not interested in going into another training, but like, soon these programs will be couples based and it'll be the shit. But for now, we're doing this work on the side of mothering, which is critical because our children are watching us, right? I really wanted to highlight, because this is such a profound thing. Oh, where is it? I lost it. Oh, erogenous zones changing, right? And this, you know, it's part of this larger transformation of how we're experiencing sexual pleasure. When your body is being constantly touched in very specific ways in very specific places. I had that experience too. It was like almost 3 years of like, do not touch my breasts or I will fucking lose it. Don't touch them. And I was like, can I? Is it okay? And I'm like, yeah, it's great now. Feels good. But it changes and you have to take your time. And I think some of the patterning of sex in maidenhood or sex before kids is that it's just like, it's kind of like this adrenaline fest where it's just like, I don't know what's going on. And we identify that as hot. we identify that as good. That's where we've gotten the most adrenaline, the most dopamine. But that is not a sustainable way of being with sex. And I really fully believe that the more we cultivate the skill set to be very deliberate and on purpose and conscientious with sex, the more sense of safety there is in everybody's system to have those experiences of like wild, explosive, what the hell just happened sex. Because there's not so much pressure to like repeat something from the past. Okay, I got a little bit lost the thread a little bit because these shares were really good. Any questions? We're going to go into another practice. But any questions so far? Anything that you're like, oh, I'm not following, or you want to reiterate, please feel free. I want to acknowledge and thank you for your share in the chat, Megan. Just waiting to see if any shares come through. Okay, so one practice that I'd really like to engage with each of you will be a little bit longer. I'll be holding space for a little bit longer. And one of the critical skills that we're cultivating with somatic work is our own ability to follow the thread. So to have an experience of an emotion or a sensation and not immediately default to something's wrong or I have to protect everybody, right? To not automatically sort of jump to conclusions, but it's a default pattern in our nervous system of, in order to be safe, I must make sure everybody else is okay, or I must play nice, or be in control. And so any sort of challenging emotion is something we have to tamp down critically. And that need for control can also look like outbursts of anger. But our ability to transform patterns, the capacity to be with disappointment, particularly in an intimate moment, and Michelle described this so beautifully, it's the capacity to notice that something is arising and to adapt to it. Okay, so this isn't going the direction I thought it was. Maybe I could say something, or maybe, we could pause and take a step back, and it doesn't have to be awkward, or maybe it is awkward, but that's okay. I can follow the thread that I'm still safe. This ability to follow the thread of our experience to something more than just, oh my God, bad, fire alarms, red, is a skill that we practice in low stakes moments. So you can't practice these skills in a high stakes adrenalized moment. You have to practice them in a class where everyone's fully clothed and we're sharing experiences and it feels nice and there's sunshine, right? We practice in low stakes moments where there's a lot of resource around. So we're going to do two things. I'm certain most of you have done this sounding practice called VU. This is where we practice tracking our experience and not getting stuck in our, sort of criticism about what's happening and whether we like it or not. We just notice. So what we're going to do is sound VU, V-U, syllable, or V-O-O. Some people spell it differently. And if you've ever taken a yoga class, it's the same principle as Om. You just take a breath and sound for the length of your breath until your breath expires. And then you just let it be. Take a full round of breath and notice, are you experiencing sensations? Is there any impulse to move your body? Is your body spontaneously moving? Do you have any emotional response? And just notice. Imagine you're watching someone else in the experience without dissociating, of course. We're going to do this a couple of times, simply to have the practice of tracking. tracking our own experience through to its natural conclusion. Okay? It might not be a big dramatic thing that you experience, but you could have quite a lot of sensation also. So if there's any point where you feel like you need something different, you need to not continue with the practice, please feel free to not continue with the practice. I don't know what's going on with you, only you do. So we'll do this 2 times to start. Since you're all muted, you can do it at your own pace. I'll do it here, although the sound on Zoom will make it so that you can't really hear me. We'll sound VU, pause for a full round of breath. Take another long, slow inhale, sound VU, pause for 1 full cycle of breath. Just notice, and then we'll come back. Okay? So get yourself comfortable. It's important that you feel relatively balanced right to left. Just notice your starting point. Is there anything in your body that you notice or a tension? Just to have that reference point. And then as you're ready, give yourself a long, slow, deep inhale and sound VU on the exhale. The sound ends, just allow yourself to take a breath and notice. Maybe another full round of breath before you do it again. And you want to feel the sound or experience most of the vibration lower in your body. So feel for it in your upper belly or even lower gut. Allowing yourself to notice and maybe even name. For example, I feel a little tingling across my belly and down my arms. I'm just going to stay with that, noticing until it more or less dissipates. Not trying to decide what it means or if it's good or it's bad. I can feel my feet on the ground. I know where I am. Just going to track the sensation until it dissipates. Everything we notice, including it's hard to sit still, my mind is very active, all of that is the information we're after. Remember, how we approach ourselves and our healing experience depends on what is true for us. So is this experience of feeling fidgety or uncomfortable or, mentally fixated familiar to you? That's really important information. Then allow yourself to come back to the reference points for relative safety in this moment. Can you feel your feet on the ground? Do you feel supported by your chair? Can you orient and notice what's not wrong in this present moment? This moves us naturally into what's called pendulating, the ability to hold the both and. Okay, so there's something uncomfortable, but there's also nothing wrong in the environment I'm in. That doesn't mean you're wrong for feeling uncomfortable. It means you've got support to be with your discomfort. That's really probably the biggest leap for most people in doing somatic work, is that the discomfort we don't see as a problem. It's not something to fix. It's information that we want to support ourselves in being able to hold and get curious about. If there's anything you want to share in the chat, feel free. We're going to go into another part of this practice. Anything surprise you about the VU practice or anything you want to say with the group? It's okay if not. Sherry says, as soon as you directed us downwards, I really let it into the lower half of my body, like weighted there, solid. The way you're speaking about it, Sherry, that seems like that was positive. And give a thumbs up or say yes in the chat if that was a positive shift. Great. Yeah. So I want to highlight in that this awareness through the practice of bringing your awareness down, connecting to your lower half, feeling solid was supportive. So this is how we start to access resources for our default responses. I know when I'm stressed, when I'm like disconnected from my part, I'm way up in my head. It's all like shoulders up and it's very tense and it's very like hard, rigid thoughts, and just putting my attention on the fact that I have a pelvis. Like my pelvis isn't doing anything special. There's nothing going on. It's just, I have a pelvis. Suddenly I am a more complete person with access to, think of the physiological function of your pelvis, to go somewhere else, to move, to have power and propulsion, right? Just our tendency toward being talking heads as a culture has created so much of this intimate difficulty. The way we treat birth in most spaces, right? It's like, oh, just forget about your down there. I don't know about you, but that's my least favorite fucking phrase in the English language. Down there. Like what are you talking about my vagina? What are we talking about? So just allowing yourself to acknowledge the fullness of yourself, which includes, oh, that didn't feel good, can be very empowering. Thanks for that share, Sherry. Okay. So we're moving into another practice. Similar focus in terms of tracking, just allowing yourself to stay present to what is happening. And just want to name that this practice might be longer than you would choose yourself. Or you might notice a part of you saying, why are we still doing this? Notice that and see if you can also stay oriented to what feels good. And if there's nothing that feels good, orient to what is not wrong. This is practice. So if you may, sit back a little bit away from the camera. You might even turn away from the camera and just give yourself another opportunity to orient, particularly if you've resonated with anything anyone else has said. It's just nice to check out our space and see how things look as we start to settle a bit in our system. And then whichever hand you do most things with, right with, whatever is your dominant hand, I want you to relax that arm on your lap or on the arm of your chair. And with the opposite hand, your non-dominant hand, just begin to touch gently the other forearm. And now feel for the kind of touch that would feel really good. Do you like what you're currently doing? If you're like, yeah, it's okay, see if you can do better than that. Find the quality of touch that you're like, oh, that feels good. And keep looking until you find that. You might not want to be touched on your forearm. And then allow yourself to inquire, is this still what I want? Or would I like to change? And how is it for your dominant hand to receive and not do? Is there anything about this that could make it even 10% better for you? And can you make that adjustment for yourself? You might be like, yeah, I actually want to lay down. Stay with this, allowing for the possibility that it evolves even further, maybe moving to a different part of your body and allowing both hands to engage now. The inquiry being, what would feel good right now? What do I want? Feel into the possibility for this last minute of orienting to the kind of pleasure that creates a kind of softening. So if you're like really working out a painful knot in a muscle right now, dispense with that for now. And feel into the possibility of a quality of touch or experience that is softening, opening. Might even make you salivate a little bit. And you certainly don't have to stop, but can start to bring it to a close, this focused practice. And allow yourself to simply sit for a moment with the experience of that. And maybe name or describe for yourself how you feel now, which could be anything from my belly has relaxed and I unclenched my jaw to I feel like water. You know, being in that sort of practice with oneself is a bit of a practice that helps us bridge being the receiver and the doer, the action-oriented partner and the receiving partner, which is what we're doing all the time, unless there is a very strong pattern in place, which makes it hard to be one or the other, or makes it, I guess, easier to be one or the other. Which, when we're experiencing dynamic change in our nervous system, which motherhood most certainly is, can create a lot of imbalance, right? Because as everyone here has named in their own way, we're almost never exactly, like it's almost never the exact dynamic with our partner. They're a whole other factor over there. Whatever's going on with us, whatever work we're doing to address ourselves, then there's this whole wild card called our partner and like their needs. It can be very frustrating. So having the capacity, building the capacity to be the doer and the receiver is a real skill. And I don't know about you, but often there's like this particular kind of practice can be very evocative for me in terms of what some of my underlying patterns are. I'm curious if anyone had, doesn't have to be like a profound realization, but curious what that was like for you. If you didn't like it, if you really enjoyed it, if you were surprised by anything. Also, non-goal oriented touch. What was that like for you? touch that's not meant to achieve anything?
I noticed I'm really trying to explore things that work for me and things that aren't working for me, because right now I'm finding, especially with my husband, that it, feels like a lot just isn't working. We have not transformed as a couple and our physical intimacy at any sort of rate that I have changed
Mm-hmm.
in becoming a mother and what my body needs and wants. So I just was able to realize, when giving myself the type of touch that was feeling good, I could like feel my pelvic floor relax, and not in a um you know for lack of a better word, not in a sexual way, but just in a, it might have the ability to receive and not be painful or resistant, which I think I need when I'm working with my husband.
Yeah. Yes.
And so it's
Wow.
got my mind turning of, okay, how do I communicate
Yeah.
better with him so that those things, um, just so that it transforms in the way that I need it to. Because I am not the maiden that we, used to be when we were intimate
Yes.
prior to
Emily,
children.
next level unlocked. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I'm so grateful that you shared your experience with us. Because that's it. It's allowing for this spaciousness, like this curiosity, right? Which requires a certain level of being oriented to safety. And also, something critical that you named is, you didn't say these words, but what I heard you say is, now I can take responsibility for my own pleasure. I have more information that I can communicate with my partner and help him. And I think there's something here I want to name, because I've certainly experienced it and I know that I'm not the only one. But sort of the grief or the frustration that can arise, particularly in motherhood with sex, when it's like, this is what goes on in my head. I'm doing fucking everything. Why do I also have to do this for you? Like, why do I have to tell you what to, can't you just, like, someone just do it for me? Just do it. Do what I want. Do what I like. Let's do it. And that, I mean, again, the grief and the capacity to hold disappointment and, like, in no uncertain terms, grow up and evolve our sexuality. And also come to the place of, like, I know what I like. And this is what I need. And when we're met in a trustworthy way, in a consistent way of having our needs honored and respected, that is transformational experience. That will take everything to the next level of wherever it's going to go. Because I think that's a huge pattern that most of us are unwinding through the experience of pregnancy, birth, and motherhood, of how consistently our needs were not met, not seen, not heard, not valued. And it's an opportunity to, like, really put a line in the sand. Like, no, actually, my needs matter. My desires are vital. And this is where, in my other work, this is where I believe mom rage comes from. It's this survival based instinct to get our needs met, to be seen. Now, not to say that rage is a functional response, but in some way it is. It's not something we want to continue, because it usually comes out sideways. But rage is a survival-based response to not being connected, not being met, not being seen, not being known, not being heard. And sexuality, as far as I'm concerned, this is my philosophical view. This is why I teach this work. Sexuality is essential life force nature. It, by its very nature, the essence of sexuality is it's over there. Where could I go? What's possible? Without that sexual energy, we're just controlling, preserving, it's survival. It's very limited, it's very stunted, it's very stagnant without that expression of what next? It's all about that next possibility. Jennifer shares non-goal oriented touch is such a big deal for me. I also feel resistant to any prescribed touch unless I'm choosing when, where, and how. This has hit alongside perimenopause for me. I'm in charge is big. I'm adding words, Jen. I think that's correct. And I need to make room for my partner to have a say. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors, right? Like when we get down into a realistic conversation about sex and sexuality and long-term partnership and having babies and body changes and pain and blah, blah, blah. It's like how it's a miracle anyone has sex. It's just a goddamn miracle. But I'm all about miracles. And someone said, I think Michelle said, it's worth fighting for. This is essential life force. And our life force is so precious and it is drawn in so many different directions. And it is vital that we prioritize these ways of expressing ourselves that are just for pleasure. And it's hard to come from, I think it's difficult in this experience of mothering where suddenly like everything has this heightened intensity and urgency to find the pockets of meaningless pleasure, right? For no reason, just because. And that's where the titration principle comes in. And that's where this simple practice of orienting or taking 3 minutes, it was 3 minutes that we spent in self-touch. 3 minutes. But those deliberate, chosen moments of slowing down and engaging pleasure are how we train the nervous system basically to have room for it. We don't have to put so much pressure on our sex life of like, this is the only place that I get that release or that I get pleasure, that I get intimacy. We have to have smaller pockets that allow for a real safety and letting go into the bigger space. Because if we're just like running, control, who's ready to like have sex? Steph says it's so hard to let others have a say after the whole day of being in charge, right? The whole day of being in charge of everything for everyone. And Jen says, if I'm going to give you all everything, I get to choose how I receive. No room for others to have a say. Yes, I get that. So like noticing that dominant pattern and belief system that's operating there, which is that you're responsible for everybody's everything. And you don't, so there's no room for you. Or you have to then also be in control of the pleasure, right? Where is the ebb and flow? Where is the both and? So part of our sexual expression, part of our sexual satisfaction is in our everyday mundane approach to everything. Hey, I don't want to do that. Would you please do it for me? I don't want to do the dishes tonight. I have no desire to make you dinner tomorrow. Can you please be responsible for that? and practice stating your needs and having them met, and also negotiating around sex, not in sex, because that will make it so much easier when you get to sex to have a conversation. I want to hear more from Steph and or Jen.
I feel like I'm in a little bit of a weird place. I'm 39 and a half weeks pregnant right now.
Yeah,
So
she's
like
ready to pop.
I'm just like existing over here. And I have a 2-year-old, so like, we're just getting by. So I mean, I think there's a lot of I really appreciate it. I don't remember who said, someone was like, my husband still finds my body attractive. I was like, really? Like I feel like I'm like a walking freak show. My husband's like in awe of what my body is capable of right now, but like it's a large body. I think this, for me, I get hung up so much at the space between, it's so easy for me to like sit here with a group of women and have these conversations and like get really into like, my sensation on my arm, or hanging with Stacy and talking about this stuff for hours through the evening. And then I like get in a space with my husband and I'm like, I don't like, there's no words, there's nothing to say. There's like, I don't, like, it's just like it feels like, the safety that is created in female spaces is where I feel safe. And I think from like a sexual perspective, that has left me like feeling like I'd much rather just like be on my own than like have this be a partnership kind of thing. And so I'm curious. I don't know. I feel like we just keep coming back to this idea of communication, and like that's where the buck stops. And so that's for me where I'm always like, it's hard to talk to him about it. And I think a lot because of what you're saying, like he has his whole own world and goes to work and comes home, and I'm like, our 2-year-old driving me insane. And also like, this person inside me is kicking me, like whatever, who knows? But I'm curious how like where that breach of conversation even starts, or like how to enter, I guess.
Yeah.
I feel stuck.
Thank you so much, Steph. There's a lot to be said for just exactly what you're describing, and also what I named earlier, the fact that like we are in these spaces cultivating skills and communicating with a person who is not necessarily, can be really difficult. And this is where it's, I think, either making an explicit request like, hey, this is something I would like to try with you. Let's say nonviolent communication, right? This is a skill I'm building because I want to have more intimate and regular communication with you. Would you listen to this and tell me what you think? I'd like, and I think it's the invitation element, because part of what happens in a marriage or in any relationship, it's difficult to stay out of expectation or assumption, especially when you're in a low resourced state, where it's like you just assume how the other person's going to respond, and maybe most of the time they do, but it's also about how we're inviting them in and recognizing their own pattern, like, oh, so they feel pressured or criticized when I say it this way. Wonder if there's another way. Like it is work, but this is also the place where like couples therapy comes in, and it's like, hey, I can't hold all of this myself. I want more with you. I think having some external support could be really good, because I want to understand you better and I don't feel very understood. Are you open to this? Can we try it for 6 months? Like this is where there's the activation part, not only just like the receiving is about knowing what we need, knowing what feels good. And then there's the take action and do. We're learning how to do both the doing and the receiving. something else you said I wanted to, oh, I mean, well, it's also like when control is a big part of how we feel a sense of safety, leaving ourselves open to being surprised by another person usually does not feel very safe. Like putting your body in the hands of someone else. Are you gonna do it right? Are you gonna do what I like? Are you gonna mess it up? Right? So already we're just not receiving. We're not connected. It's conflicting energy. So again, these practices where it's like being able to follow the through line of an experience, following the experience of being a little bit uncomfortable and not falling into the trap of the mind, staying with thoughts only, but just recognizing, what is my body doing right now? How am I breathing? What's happening in my external environment? Okay, I'm actually safe. Nothing is wrong. I'm just uncomfortable. I wonder what could happen next. And then the 3-minute game, which I'll send resources for and information about, is a critical practice for you and your partner, where it's an opportunity to, in a way that has nothing to do with outcome. It's not foreplay. It's not about getting anybody's pants off. It's 3 minutes to take turns being touched the way that you really like. So you set a timer for 3 minutes. You say to your partner, hey, I would really like to have my hand massaged. Are you willing to do that for me? Yes. Okay, great. I would like really firm pressure and mostly in the center of my palm. And then they start doing, and you give them feedback. I want it slower. Could you slow down, please? And now could you trace your fingers down the line of my fingers? Could you pull on them gently? Can you slow down, please? Mostly what you'll be saying probably. Could you slow down, please? And then you practice in a like there's no outcome you're getting to. It's just being touched in a way that gives you pleasure. You're practicing communicating with them, having them take in the feedback and act on it. And then you do it for them too. Next level of that game is, how would you like to be touched? And they get to tell, no, this is how, now I'm getting the game screwed up. I'll send you the instructions. I have them written down. I can't get them right in this moment where I'm like watching the clock and I'm like, we only have 10 minutes. Oh my God. But essentially you exchange touch in a way that allows for this communication and feedback to be practiced in a low stakes time, but it's also building fluency in intimacy. You have the opportunity to practice. I think this is a critical piece that's not often talked about, not talked about enough. You have the opportunity to tell them they did a good job. I really liked it when you did that. I would love to have you do that again. Or that feels so good to me. So we're not only telling the person, don't do that, I don't like that. You build so much more intimacy and confidence and capacity to be with one another when you start to feed, this is nervous system work, feed the good. Where is the pleasure? I love it when you touch me like that. That was so nice when you just pet my head last night for 30 minutes. Whatever the thing is. Like, I love just being here in this position with you. It makes me feel so safe. Let them hear that. Let them know that. And vice versa. Like, it feels so good to know that what you're doing is working. So you can invite that too. Do you like this? Would you like more or less pressure? Let's say you're giving someone a foot rub. And you start to find these entry points to one another's pleasure, which builds intimacy, and you start to show up consistently for one another in that way. And it just builds trust overall and allows for these moments of more intensity, which is sex, to be possible, because there's this foundation built where it's like, oh, we know how to touch each other. I know how to talk to you about this. And you get in the habit of even asking, would you like it like this or like that? And it starts to feel less awkward. Because when the nervous system is in this heightened state of like being in control is a very high activation state. Go, do, don't drop it, keep going. And I don't know about you, but when I'm in that state, I'm being a little crass here, but it's like, I just want to be pushed up against the wall and fucked. Like, let's just do it. Because I'm so here, and coming down to anything like talking about it, I'm like, ugh. So it takes practice and acknowledgement, understanding of what our typical patterns are and how that impacts us moving into any sort of more parasympathetic state or even receptive state. And if you want to have more intimacy with your husband, but you feel like you're in control all of the time, and that's actually having an adverse effect, you've got to find ways to let go of the reins, to put them in the driver's seat, and to trust them to do what they're going to do. And to also know what you need to do to come down off the edge and feel relatively balanced in that state. Like, it's your responsibility too. Some of the responsibility is giving away responsibility, and some of the responsibility is the things you do to take care of yourself to be in a more receptive state.
I, in response to that, all of those things, I was thinking of like one of the things that I realized when I was out of like baby time, like deep in it, like Stephanie is talking about, where I also had a 2-year-old, and then I was super pregnant, you know, like I was the most pregnant a body could be. You know, I had like 10-pound babies, 9-pound babies, you know. So was that I realized when I was out of it is that that time is so overstimulating in for all of your sensory systems. And if you have any of those that you have like a high sensitivity to, what I realized is that afterwards that I have a huge auditory sensitivity, and that is like all that happens when you have a 2-year-old and a baby and stuff. There's so much auditory input that dysregulates me really hard, that even like, you know, tools I could have used was just like earplugs for part of the day, or, you know, things like that, is that between the communication, so you're in that state all the time, taking care of things and being in charge and making decisions when you're in that state. So you're kind of like riding cortisol hard, like all day. And then you transition to a time where maybe you're alone with your husband, or you have this time where it's supposed to be an intimate time, or you're going to have sex or whatever it is. And if there's no transition of like literally spacing, I called it like staring at the wall time, which was like, I literally needed time to like be in an almost like a sensory deprivation environment, which was like a dark room usually.
Yeah.
Me just like literally staring at the wall, doing nothing, to have that. You actually need the spacing out time, which is totally robbed during your like when you're taking care of babies and toddlers. You don't get spacing out time, which satisfies both that sensory overstimulation, but also the feeling of being in control all the time. It's not like I'm not like a great person to be in control. That's not my favorite role to play. It's just what happened when I was a stay-at-home mom. It's not like somebody picked me like she's a really good leader. It's like it just was on me. But having that space between like so much overstimulation and any conversation about intimacy is like that space is so necessary to have that be a productive conversation. Because if you're just rolling into just high cortisol. And then you're like, okay, I'm gonna solve this problem today. And they're coming from wherever they've been all day, which is a lot too, but it's a totally different role and a completely different experience than you're having. It's like that's never gonna be effective. For me, it was never effective in that it's like I approached it with that same amount of overstimulation where I'm just like, yeah, let's solve it and then we can be done and do it. And like, and it's like, no, I needed like an extensive time where I was not thinking about anything that had to do with any of these roles, where I'm doing like looking at flowers outside or whatever it is. And I love the 3-minute game for that, in that like it's low stakes and it's short, and
Yeah.
it's like forces you to be present basically in a way that like tunes everything out. And I've done that. I'm a pelvic therapist, so I do that with people in my clinic too, where it's like if they bring their partner in, I'll do it as like a supervised thing with them in the clinic that they can transfer to when they go home. And it's really interesting to see how the communication issues that they've been having appear in that first round of practice of that. That you can, if you have coaching, you can help, move them through it, but it's very consistent, like what has not been working in their sexual relationship when you try that game. Um, and it feels really stilted, but both people are learning it. And I think that's a really key part too, is that both people are learning that skill together. And like people said in the chat, nobody is taught how to talk about sex. Nobody. Like, I mean, maybe a couple people
Yeah.
who had like some parent who prioritized it or something like that. But like, I I almost never see somebody who has been taught like how to actually approach that, and I certainly hadn't been taught that either. So it's like learning the skill together is like we both don't know how to do this. Nobody's an expert.
Yeah.
And we're both learning something that's a brand new skill.
Thank you, Molly. Wise Molly. Coming into these last few minutes, I just want to give time for question and answer. Any last comments? Let me name one more time. There will be a longer course that's going to involve the wheel of consent skills, lots of somatic practice, because ultimately, like, we can talk about it all day long and have an understanding and resonance, but if you don't practice, if you don't do anything about it, your nervous system will not change. So most of us get bogged down in this need to intellectualize and understand cognitively everything that is going on, but we're not actually doing anything because the discomfort is so real. And our mind is where we've established we have control, we have power. So this course is going to be about practice in a low stakes environment. I'm so grateful to each of you for showing up, for bringing your questions and sharing your voice so generously. Do you have any questions for me? Anything you'd like to get clarity on about this class or what's coming next? You're welcome to ask about. I'm really glad you didn't have your baby today, Steph, so you could be here. And I hope you have your baby
A
soon.
little bit glad I haven't had my
Yeah, I
baby
know.
yet.
I was going to say, and we hope you have your baby soon and get
Yes.
that baby in your arms.
Baby in your arms very soon. Okay. What a wonderful way to spend my morning. I'm grateful to each of you. I hope you got something that you can take with you that enhances your experience of yourself, of your body, your sexual expression and pleasure. And I will send this recording out as soon as it's available. Look for an email from me. And if you have any further questions that you want to send to me privately, you'll have my email address and you can reach out to me directly. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.